Joining us now to talk about how Joburg Water will be spending a lot of money on upgrading our infrastructure is Managing Director of Joburg Water, Lungile Dlamini. Morning, Lungile. I've just been reading that Joburg Water allocated 20 billion rand of the Mayor's much vaunted 110 billion rand infrastructure spend. So I suppose the first question is, what you going to do with 20 billion rand?
Well, I think first I need to contextualize what our drivers are in terms of this huge infrastructure investment plan. Historically, or post-1994, I should begin by saying that, nationally we had a problem whereby you had previously unserved communities that didn't have access to both water and sanitation. So as the National Treasury Fiscus bulletins attest, you will find that a lot of investment was made in extending services to those communities. I am proud to share with yourselves that in the context of City of Joburg, 98% of our population or citizens have got piped water, and 94% have got access to sanitation. So we have, if you like, a backlog there in terms of access of about 2% and 6% respectively.
When you say sanitation, you mean waterborne sanitation?
Yes, I mean waterborne sanitation, and the 5% backlog would be in informal settlements where people have got nominal services. By that, they have to walk within 100 meters to either a VIP toilet or a chemical toilet or a communal standpipe.
But there is access to something.
But there is access. Yeah. Now, we couldn't, given that resources compete, for various needs, we couldn't have done both at that time. But I think the time now is well nigh that we need to start looking at our infrastructure asset base. Now, in the context of Johannesburg, which recently, according to the census 2011, there's huge in-migration into Johannesburg, people looking for economic opportunities and so on. Johannesburg has actually overtaken KwaZulu-Natal as the most populous, if you like, Gauteng, a province. And we're sitting with about the bulk of that population. So you have increased densification. You have huge demands for water, for basic services, housing, etc. And as a result, that is putting a lot of pressure on the infrastructure, which I'm afraid has been consumed to a level of about 53%. So we do use an indicator which we refer to as a remaining useful life of an economic asset, like infrastructure provided by government.
Let me ask you this question, and one's very aware of, with all the electricity problems, of electricity infrastructure issues. So on the one hand there's the generating by Eskom, on the other hand there's the distribution of electricity by the city councils, municipalities. And we've heard frequently from City Power in Johannesburg, it's old infrastructure, it keeps breaking down, there's cable theft and things like that. I have to say, maybe I'm lucky that I've had lots of power failures, but I've had no water failures. Are you in a better position? Because I think in both senses infrastructure was neglected for a long time. Are you better off than your electrical counterparts?
Well, I'd say we relatively have some lead time in as far as asset, water and sanitation asset renewal, in that we have consumed, in terms of wear and tear, we have consumed about on average 53% of our assets. It doesn't mean that the assets are not there, but it means
they need replacing.
The assets now are due for renewal.
So what principle guides you? I mean, you have to get a system in place whereby you renew this. What is that system?
Well, I'm glad that you've asked that question. We pride ourselves at Johannesburg Water as having one of the best asset management plan. We have a 20-year asset management plan. So the planning is complete. So now it's implementation.
In South Africa, that's usually a problem. Good plans, bad implementation. But how are you going to do it?
Well, in the last, budget Lekgotla, we did, make representations to our political principals to say we need a sustained investment going into the future to be able to cater for the growth in demand for services, as well as meet the huge population from in-migration coming to the city of Joburg. I mean, as we speak now, the census 2011 indicated that there were about 4.4 million people in Joburg. Now, as of 2014, if you assume that growth rate is still applicable, we're sitting at about close to
Yep.
5 million.
Now, if you look, I just think of the northwest area of Johannesburg, which is mostly where I move around. So it's that axis between Pretoria, Midrand, centre of Johannesburg, to Roodepoort, Krugersdorp, that sort of area. The number of new settlements out there, townhouses, cluster homes, retirement villages, informal settlements. Mushrooming isn't the word. I mean, they're just multiplying. How do you keep up when it comes to water? Because everyone's got to have water. They can do without electricity, but they've got to have water.
Well, I'm glad that you're asking that question, in that, in terms of water supply, it is not infinite. We have to start now looking at per capita consumption of our water. That is, much as people talk about reducing your carbon footprint, we need to start now in earnest to reduce our per capita water consumption.
Are we wasteful users of water?
Well, there are weaknesses in that. Our leakage, our water loss leakages in terms of international benchmarks leave much to be desired, and nationally. And you find that metros such as Durban, Ekurhuleni, Tshwane and Cape Town, to a large extent, have got a better non-revenue water level than we have in Joburg.
Let me come back to your system, and one of the pieces of paper that I took on this is that there's a 2% rule, that you renew 2% of the infrastructure every year and you just keep at it. It doesn't sound very much, but what does it actually mean in practice?
Well, what it means in practice is that, take Johannesburg, we've got about 11,400 kilometers of a water distribution network, and we've got 10,800 sewage collection network. Now, the golden rule, international golden rule, is that you need to replace 2%, at least 2% of that network every year, and that's good practice. I mean, if you take Singapore, who happen to be at top of the food chain in terms of best practice, they replace 3.5% of their network, and their network is to the extent of Johannesburg, and their unaccount for water, both physical and commercial, is sitting at about 5%. Now that's best practice. Right. Now our plan going into the future, we intend to reduce unaccount for water. In fact, we already have. In the last 3-4 years, unaccount for water in Johannesburg was sitting at about 34%. We're down to 28.9%. Because we've started implementing this build program, let's say 18 months, 2 years ago, because the plan was already in place. So this year alone, this current financial year, we've replaced 95 kilometers compared to the prior years where we were replacing 25 kilometers. And the plan is to replace 143 kilometers. Right. And then in the subsequent years, then we'll then wrap up 300 kilometers, 350 kilometers.
Let's come back to the usage. Are we going to be rationed? Is that what you're looking at? That every house, every household that uses water is allowed to have so many thousands of litres per day, per week, and then if you exceed that, or do you charge much more for the more water that you use?
Well, if you look at the water supply chain in the context of Gauteng and including the city of Johannesburg, we actually import water from Lesotho Water Highlands Scheme. Phase 1 has been implemented. We're now on to phase 2, which is intended to be commissioned around 2020 to 2021. In the interim, we have to reduce our water footprint by 15%. We're well ahead of that, as I've already indicated, that we used to sit at about 33-34% account for water. Now we're down to 28.9 as per the last financial year. Now, obviously, at some point, we have to reduce our per capita consumption. It's not a question of whether you can afford to pay for water. It's not a question of whether you're poor, but it's your lifestyle, right? I mean, owning a garden in the future is going to be a luxury. An expansive garden is going to be a luxury, because water we'll have to price water accordingly, among other things. But before we get there, we're looking at other options. We need to diversify our resource, and by diversification we're looking at rainwater harvesting to begin with. Yeah,
we have all these thunderstorms and it all roads away.
I mean, in the last two and a half years we've had decent rains, but we lost an opportunity because the rainwater harvesting infrastructure is not in place. We're also looking at retrofitting of existing and new buildings, private and government housing development and properties, whereby we need to promote and encourage the use of water-saving devices.
I was thinking of Nedbank, where I went the other day, the big Nedbank building. It's very difficult actually to use very much water there because the way the taps are designed in their washrooms, it just gives you a little bit of water, just as much as you need, and then it stops. So there's clearly, that's the sort of thing you're talking about.
Yeah.
What about quality? I remember for many years Rand Water was said to be world-class in its quality of water. I presume you get your water from them.
From Rand Water.
And so on. So the quality of water in Johannesburg, still world-class?
Yes. Yeah,
Is there a measure? Is there a score that we get?
Yes, there's a score. I mean, Johannesburg Water has consistently maintained our quality of, because yes, we buy it from Rand Water already, of a high quality, water, but we have to store it in our reservoirs, we have to distribute it, and there could be what we call secondary contamination. But we were in the last 10 years, we were able to maintain 99.9%, quality, and by that is in terms of World Health Organization standards, and of course the Department of Water Affairs drinking water standards. So
well, it is encouraging, and as I say, I never have a problem with the quality or with the supply of it. As I say, maybe I've been lucky. One thing that gets us, or gets me, and I think gets a lot of people, is you're driving along and you see a huge spout of water coming out of the ground. There's clearly a pipe broken, there's something wrong, and there's thousands of litres of water just going down the drain, literally. How good are you at fixing those kinds of bursts?
We have a multifaceted or multi-pronged strategy. Pipe replacement is one of them, and we're planning in the next 2 years to replace 900 kilometers, because the average age of our network is in the order of plus or minus 53%. As I've already indicated, we've consumed 53% of the useful life of our asset. One of the things that we're doing is that we're doing pressure management. What you find at night when people are not drawing water, right, the infrastructure is under pressure and the leakage rate is higher, right? So there are certain leaks that we cannot detect that are underground. I mean, imagine your sink when it's dripping. During the day, the rate of dripping is not as high as during the night, because there's no draw off. So we have identified areas where the operating pressure in the system is in the order of between 8 and 9 bar. So we're going to bring that down with pressure management to the acceptable,
which makes bursts less likely.
Yeah. But in addition to that, in terms of the network teams and responsiveness, we have now begun to set a minimum of how many of those leaks are fixed per day for our network teams. Because in the past it was just people would just do as they like.
And we all hope for the best.
But now we're setting that minimum, and we're also introducing what other metros have. It's called first line response. That is, even before you actually attend to repairing the burst, that you first go out there and then you close off and isolate the area and close off all the valves.
Lungile, we'll have to stop there. It's a discussion that we just have to guillotine, I'm afraid,
Yeah.
but we'd like to carry on with this at some other point. That's Lungile Dlamini, Managing Director of Joburg Water.